We are blessed to be joined by someone who has come up on the podcast a number of times for the amazing work that they offer to the entire mortgage, real estate, and economic space here in Canada. Rob Carrick, thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get into a lot of the hard-hitting questions that we have prepared for you, Rob, why don't you tell our listeners who probably recognize your name, tell us a little bit about what you do and maybe why we should be asking you some of these questions.
I have been writing about business and economics and investing and personal finance for 35 plus years. And I've been the Globe's personal finance columnist for about 25 of them. And real estate is one of my number one topics. It's of interest to me, and it is of keen interest to Globe and Mail readers. And that's why I have been covering it like a blanket for a long time.
Like a blanket, indeed. Yeah, you have put out a number of amazing articles that we've used on the podcast. And I always appreciate your little bit of sense of humor. I was doing some research this morning, and even one where it was like how to stick handle a mortgage kind of thing. So
Got to keep it light, right?
You got to keep it. Hey, it's a heavy topic these days.
Right.
You got to keep it light. And I think that's why you're such a great fit to have on the show here. Rob, I want to dive right into it and hit you with a big question right off the bat here. You've obviously been one of the leading voices in the Canadian real estate and the Canadian mortgage space for a while now, decades at this point. And going back those decades, you've seen other periods of economic distress and uncertainty. Are we equivalent to any of those past instances? And if so, what lessons can we take away from that period and apply those lessons to the pickle that we've found ourselves in today?
Well, for me, the watermark for economic disruption is the 2008-09 global financial crisis. And so far, what we have today isn't even remotely comparable to that. That was chaos. That was people who were in the industry, the financial industry, for their whole careers were melting down. I could hear the fear in their voices when they were talking. Nobody had a clue what was going to happen. Basically, markets were in free fall. Nobody understood why. Nobody understood where the bottom was. The economy was infected by all this, much more in the United States than here, but nevertheless, there was a recession. But it was just this rampant uncertainty. So where we are today is not anything close to that. Now, if we were to get a full-blown tariff war, I think we would be seeing a lot of disruption and a lot of pain. I don't want to call it chaos. Chaos is a word I've seen already used about the tariffs, and I think it's a way overstatement, and it just gets people torqued. We know it's going to be a hard blow to the economy. The forecasts I'm seeing are that we could enter a recession, could be a very severe recession by recent standards, but it's all things we've seen before and we can understand. Businesses will get conservative. They will have to pare staff. They may have to shut facilities. We know how that works by and large because we've seen it before.
Okay, so going back to, the global financial crisis, right? I mean, that did not affect Canada nearly as bad as it did the States. So you're right. I think that comparison isn't as strong as some people make it out to be. But we did see other Canadian recessions in the 90s, and we have seen a lot more comparison to that. Now, you were covering the stories back then as you are today. Are there more similarities back then? And if so, what were people doing back then that they should be doing today?
Well, I was barely aware of it because I was a young guy just getting into the workforce, but the recession of the early 80s was very sharp and very long and very disruptive. And it took a long time to get out of it. Of course, that was all complicated by inflation that was much higher than it is now. Then there was a recession of the early 90s. I remember as a young economics reporter being on Parliament Hill and talking to the finance minister at the time, Paul Martin, about the unemployment rate being above 10%. And when might it go below 10%? And he said it'll take a while. Of course, now we're in the 6% range and everybody's up in arms about it. So there's a little context for you.
Okay, let's shift gears here. Let's move over to some mortgage questions, which I know you're just dying to answer, Rob.
Bring them on.
Okay, so you've covered this, as I said, the stick handling, but you've covered this quite a number of times over the years as the mortgage market, and I'm a mortgage agent. As the mortgage market has been through a ton of volatility, rate hikes, rate cuts, how those are affecting the market overall. Now we're looking at fixed versus variable again. That seems to be one of the main questions we're getting. What are some of the most important questions that people should be asking themselves when they're deciding on choosing a fixed versus a variable, let's say between today and the next kind of 6 months?
I think the big question is, what is your number one goal? To get the lowest possible borrowing cost, or to get a reasonable deal and feel comfortable that I am insulated from everything that's happening in financial markets and politically. My rate is set, it's locked in. See, I'll talk to my lender again in 4.5 years or 2.5 years, assuming I get a 3 or a 5-year fixed term. And, I really encourage people to think about the emotional side of it now more than ever. Like, how stretched people are. You know what they are. Like, I'm getting emails from readers asking crazy questions. Should I sell all my investments? Should I buy gold? There's a lot of stress out there. And if you can cross your mortgage off that list of things to worry about, I say you go for it. And that's not the lowest possible borrowing cost. So what? You paid a little extra. You got security. It's worth it. Now, you want the lowest possible borrowing cost, you have to look at variable right now. I think that especially if we get into these tariffs and the Bank of Canada has to start cutting rates more aggressively, I think you're going to see many chops in the overnight rate, which is going to flow directly to the prime rate and then to variable rate mortgages. Fixed could drift lower as well, but it's a complicated world. I was just looking at bond yields this morning, and they're ticking higher because inflation in the States is a lot stronger than people imagine. So the fixed side is going to be very unpredictable.
So I guess it's totally subjective to that individual person, right? There's no kind of blanket answer here.
No, you know what? I would say to a very savvy, sophisticated, experienced person who has resources to roll with any curves that come, go variable. I mean, I think that is the ultimate smart, shrewd move right now. But I just don't know if a lot of people can handle it. I mean, I don't really foresee rates backing up. Like, how could you build an economic scenario where interest rates go back up and really hurt people who start with a variable rate mortgage right now? But I think people are just picking up little pieces of economic intel right now and spinning stories for themselves about what's going to happen and what they should be worrying about. And they're going on the wrong track a lot of the time, and they're putting themselves under stress for reasons that aren't always that sound. That's why I think the fixed rate mortgage it's bulletproof. You're in a bunker for the term of your mortgage.
Yeah. I think, and the 5-year fixed has historically been just like the go-to mortgage. And I think for a while there, everyone hopped on the variable. So many people got burned by it. You're right. If we were to see rates escalate again and people are on the fixed, on the variable, I don't know if anyone would ever choose the variable again if it was like.
No, it would be that would blow it up completely as a choice. But we have to ask ourselves, what would have to happen in the world and in the economy and in the minds of investors in the Bank of Canada to make interest rates start trending higher? I guess we need a huge eruption of inflation. But if there's tariffs and the economy is struggling, we're going to see inflation in specific areas related to tariffs. But in the broader economy, there's no way the Bank of Canada is going to drop the bomb of higher interest rates on a struggling economy. It's not going to happen. They're going to have to suck it up with little bits of inflation here and there.
You mentioned the financial stress that people were feeling, and one of the big themes around the financial stress is renewals for 25 and 26. We know that a massive portion of Canadian mortgages will be renewing this year next. And it seems like the Bank of Canada has done a lot of work to get rates down. The bond market has done a lot of work for rates to come down. And now I think that renewal wall is maybe not as scary as it once was. What are your thoughts on that? Like, are you generally concerned, or do you think the Canadian economy generally needs to be concerned about the massive amount of renewals taking place in 25 and 26?
Well, it's hard to find good financial news these days, but these renewers, the tally I've heard is 1.2 million people, are getting lower mortgage rates than they would have 4 months ago, 6 months ago, 8 months ago, 12 months ago. So rates are the trend is down for fixed rate mortgages, with lots of little blips up and down. I think when there was all these scare stories about the renewal wall, mortgage rates were a lot higher than they were now. They had a 5 handle on them. Now we're even starting to see some 5-year rates, I guess probably for insured mortgages with very favorable lending characteristics, maybe a little bit below 4%. So we've taken a lot of the pressure off these renewing people. I guess a lot of the concern we need to have about those people is, what's the unemployment rate? What's the job market doing? And if the job market is solid and interest rates have come down, then these people, it can't come as news to them that they're going to be renewing at a higher rate. Hopefully they're going to be making adjustments in their finances. They're going to get raises, that sort of thing. I'm not that worried about it if everything holds together.
Okay, you heard it here first, folks. Not that worried about it. That seems to be a pretty good outlook. And I think if I'm correct here, I think it's like 1.2 million mortgages this year, and I believe 26 has even more than that. I think it's like around 1.5. So, massive numbers. That you're right. That could be the straw that breaks the camel's back if it's not handled correctly. Now, as far as like that mortgage war goes, how do you see the banks and some of the lending institutions reacting to that? Are we going to see this battle of the big banks trying to, get every piece of business they can? I can tell you from the mortgage broker side, Rob, that trying to get an A deal done and competing with the bank is next to impossible right now, especially on a renewal. We're just literally, I've had probably a dozen people kind of be asking for help with renewals in the last week. Almost every single one of them, I'm like, honestly, just go back to your bank. There's likely no way that we can beat this.
I am finding and hearing that the banks are competing hard, and they want to keep business. And it's a competitive marketplace out there. I just got an email this morning from a pitch from some new mortgage brokerage operation opening using AI to process applications, blah, blah, blah. You know what? Oh, good. Another competitor. The banks are taking note of that and thinking, okay, we don't want to lose customers. Look at TD. Look at all the problems they're having. They just sold their U.S. brokerage division. They've raised all this money to become more competitive in the Canadian market. Well, how are they going to compete? A lot of it will be on the investing side and the asset management side, and a lot of it will be acquiring mortgages. So the banks are loaded and ready to, and they want to keep and they want to grow. So they've got, if the economy is slowing and they've got to generate growth for shareholders, well, one way to do it is to steal clients from other places.
So if you are one of those clients that has one of these mortgages coming up in the next 6 to 12 to 18 months kind of thing, right? In that 25, 26, mortgage cliff renewal, all the rhetoric we've heard about it, and you're feeling a bit anxious or you're maybe not fully aware of what you should do, what would your advice be for some of these people that are going into this, feeling anxious and have seen the headlines and are kind of scared about the whole process? Should they be scared? How would you advise them to strategically navigate? Or as you so eloquently put it, how should someone stick handle through this?
How should they stick handle as well? Let me tell you what I would do. What I would do is I would reach out to my lender and maybe a mortgage broker or two to get a variety of opinions. And I would say, here's my renewal. Here's what my mortgage balance is going to be. Tell me, based on current rates, how much my payments are going up. What's an attainable deal for me on rates? And you can do a variable and a fixed scenario. And how much are my payments going up? I need to know. How can I adjust? And then that's my worst case scenario, because I think if we're renewing rates in the next 12 or so months, higher rates on the fixed side, maybe. On the variable side, nah. So I'm comfortable with these scenarios. That allows me to prepare. Do I have to make changes in our household cash flow? Do I have to maybe sell a car? Am I going to have to give up my TFSA contributions for a short period to keep up? But have a plan. Be ready. Don't be surprised when you get the renewal notice and they're telling you what your new payments are. You should know that well in advance how much your new payments are going to be. And you should just be able to glide right into that. It might be painful, but at least you'll be prepared. And there's time to do that preparation.